Hello, everyone. Welcome to Communication Research class. My name is Mirjana Pantic. I go by Mira, but you can call me Professor Pantic or Dr. Pantic. Communication research is one of my favorite courses to teach because I find it quite interesting and intellectually challenging. So let's start now with the introductory lecture and see what this course is about. I will share my screen with you. Okay, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation for today, and I also have an exercise that I will show you at some point of this lecture and explain what I expect of you to do. So we're going to talk about communication research today. Have you ever wondered what do I need to be successful in graduate school? I assume that you have. Or for instance, what Instagram pictures get the highest number of likes? Or will my degree get me a high paying job? Or let's take a look at some other questions that I also prepared for you. How do millennials make purchase decisions? That could be one of the questions to ask. Or what are students' preferred social media platforms for news gathering? Where do Americans get their news? Or what are the challenges of teamwork? So these are just some questions that a person who wants to do research in communications can pose. So I gave you these examples just to think about how this area of communication research is wide and how many different questions you can ask and try to answer them by collecting data to by collecting data that will help you answer the questions that you're asking. What is research about? Research, the definition of research is it is a systematic process of posing questions like the questions that we asked on previous slides, answering questions, and demonstrating that your answers are valid, that your answers are backed up with some data, and then sharing your research results. Why is all of this important? Why is it especially important that you are going to demonstrate that your answers are valid? It is because we make different claims every day, but when it comes to, and you can make claims and somebody will ask you, well, if you're saying that, for instance, if you spend more time studying, you will receive better grades. So if you make such claims, you need to have some argument to back up your claims. So in your case, to be certain that what you're claiming is correct, we want to collect some data. You want to go around, ask students about their studying habits and see whether the time they spend, for instance, studying in their graduate program, is that time really related to their productivity? Is that time really related to their grades in those courses in which they spend time studying a lot? So you can ask questions like that, and you want to collect data. So you're going to collect data, for instance, from your peers, just to demonstrate that what you're saying is valid. Also, when you write essays in your other courses, your undergraduate courses or your graduate courses, whatever you state over there, you need to back up with some arguments. Well, in case of research, communication research, you really need to go further and actually and if you are doing your own research, then you need to provide your own data, not just rely on what other people had to say about the topic at hand, but to provide your own data as evidence to what you're saying. What is communication research? So when we talk about research, we talk about this process that starts with asking questions. So communication research is a process of posing questions related to human communications and then designing and implementing research that will answer those questions. So I just mentioned one example, which is how you can collect data and see whether students who study more, who spend more time studying, receive higher grades. So that means you start with the question and then you collect data from the students, and that is how you are actually implementing your research. And then when you collect all the data, you want to analyze the data and answer the questions that the question that you ask. So you're going to say, yes, students who spend more time studying receive higher grades in graduate school. What do communication researchers usually study? I gave you some examples, and I might be a bit biased because some of the examples that I mentioned are related to news consumption or social media. That is one of the reasons for that, is because it is what I usually study. But there are also other aspects, very interesting aspects of communication research, not just social media related, but communication researchers also study organizational communication. And this is something that you learned about in industry theory and practice if you have taken that course with me already. But basically, we focus on studying diverse issues related to organizational communication, and the goal of studying communication that happens within an organization in a workplace is because we want to improve it. We want to create an atmosphere where relationships among coworkers are stronger, when we can achieve higher productivity. And these are the reasons why communication researchers are especially interested in studying organizational communication, group communication as well, communication technologies. So what are effective ways to communicate with people? Let's take a look at the current situation that we are in. The majority of us these days work remotely, or we take classes remotely. So if we look at communication technologies, what would you identify as most effective tools to communicate with your peers or to communicate with your co-workers, for example? What is more, what do you find more engaging? Do you find more engaging lectures where you watch a video and you can see your professor in the corner, you can see their face? Do you find those lectures more engaging, or would you like to see this only the screen, only the PowerPoint presentation? Well, I'll tell you, I conducted a mini research, and what I learned when I conducted that research is that graduate students at PACE actually like to see their professor's face in the corner. So they like to see their professor when they're watching a video lecture. And also, according to the data that I collected for that research, I wanted to collect data for that research to make sure that we are delivering courses online that are effective, that you're enjoying. So I also asked questions related to the length of a video lecture. So based on your answers, I realized that it would be best, even though I like to talk a lot, but it would be best if I just kept these lectures to about 30 to 40 minutes, which is what I will do. So communication technology is one of the things that you can study. Also, interpersonal communication, so gender-based communication, for instance, or intercultural communication. This is one of the things that I personally like to study, but I don't study it as much as I study some news and social media related phenomenon, but I also like studying intercultural communication. And even if I don't do my own research in this area, I like reading studies about intercultural communication, because many times, especially, so I live in New York and we live in this diverse society. So I think it is really important to read these studies about intercultural communication, because in your communication with your, let's say, peers or friends, or maybe distant relatives, if you have a communication with them and if they come from like a different cultural background, then understanding how we are different communication wise, like how different cues mean different things in different cultures. Understanding this will actually help you understand each other. It will help you not judge too quickly, not get mad, and just understand the people you're communicating with before you draw any conclusions about them. So these are just some of the topics that you can explore as a communication researchers. What are some of the basic assumptions of research? And this is where the confusing part starts, because we have different perspective on research. Some believe that observations capture reality, but in other instances, observations do not necessarily capture reality. What does it mean? This is not, communication research is in the domain of humanities, social science, but if we look at if we look at other forms of research in hard science, everything is math, it is simple, it is not simple, it is difficult to do that research, but I'm saying it is not, the communication research is more complex in a way, because we cannot measure things the way we can measure in hard science. So, but let's take a look at what is it that we can do when it comes to this research. What are some of the observations that capture reality, and what are some of the observations that do not capture it instantly? If you want to, for example, let's take a look at the observations that capture reality. So if you want to, let's say, see how many students on campus, what's the percentage of students on campus who do not wear masks properly? And what you can do is simply do an observation. So it's the best thing to do. So you're not going to ask students. So there are different methods in research. One of the methods is doing a survey. But why would you do a survey and ask students if they're wearing masks properly or not? Because they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily going to provide accurate or honest answers. But instead, you want to go and pick random classrooms perhaps on campus and see the number of students, the percentage of students who are not wearing masks properly. So that is something that you can observe directly and just take notes on it. So you can observe directly how many people. You can just simply go into a classroom and count the number of people who are like wearing masks on their chin or wearing a mask under their nose. So this is something that you can observe directly. But when it comes to attitudes that people have, it's not, you can't see it. A person can behave in a certain way, but you don't know whether that person has, let's say, negative attitude toward, let's say, abortion, for instance. So that has always been an intriguing topic. So you actually need to ask them questions. In that case, you would do a survey and ask them different questions related to abortion to measure their attitudes. So it's not directly observable. You need to ask them multiple questions to assess their attitudes. So how strong are their attitudes against abortion? And so that's a different thing. In case of like, whether you want to wear a mask or not properly, you can go count people, you can see that directly. But when it comes to other more complex things, such as attitudes towards, I mentioned, abortion, or it can be attitudes toward a political party or some other issue in the society, in that case, this is not something that is directly observable. Another assumption of research is that theories about human behavior can or cannot be generalized. So some believe that we are all individuals with our own perspective, perceptions, that you can make generalization based on a group of people about how the rest of us will behave. We are also unpredictable. But then other people believe that, yes, there are certain patterns in behavior that can be generalized. So because we have this perspective that there are things that could be generalized, such as how people will behave after let's say, seeing a commercial about this new about this new hair product or some other product, like are they going to automatically go online and purchase that product if they see that there is a famous actress promoting that product in an ad? Or, these are things like if you see that, let's say 1,000 out of 3,000 people who just saw that ad started Googling and searching for the product, that apparently you might conclude that, that people, okay, that's probably not a good number, but if there's like more than 50%, you could conclude that people are likely to purchase a product after seeing it being advertised on TV by a celebrity actress. So there are researchers who are on this side of the spectrum, believing that human behavior cannot be generalized, and some that who believe that yes, it could be generalized. And because we have this, because we generalize data, we are able to predict outcome of elections, for instance. Another basic assumption is that researchers should or should not distance themselves from research participants. So what is this about? Imagine going to, so on one hand, let's say you want to study rituals of a tribe in New Zealand, for example, and you feel like you should distance yourself from the participant. You should be somewhere in the corner. You should not let them know that you're actually observing their behavior, or that you're engaged with them in any way. So from that perspective, as a researcher, you're trying to kind of distance yourself and making sure that you're just collecting data, that you're being objective in your analysis. But then another researcher may think that, it would actually be more beneficial for me to engage, to actually be part of that culture, to participate in that ritual, to understand what makes people happy, what makes people engage in such ritual, like what kind of benefits or what kind of joy does such ritual bring to them. So some believe that it is important to engage, but some believe that also you should distance yourself, especially because if you engage or if you make your presence and your data collection apparent to everyone else, perhaps that could change people's behavior, and maybe your data would not be as relevant and accurate as they would be if those people just behaved in a way that they didn't realize that you were engaged, that you were actually trying to make some observations and analysis about their behavior. And another basic assumption is that there is or there is not one best position from which we observe human behavior. What does it mean? Basically, there are so many different methods that could help you collect data if you're doing research in communications, and sometimes one method is not sufficient. Sometimes one method is sufficient. When we talk about attitudes, for instance, it is frequently sufficient to design a survey and ask people different questions to measure their attitudes. But sometimes we need several methods to assess, to answer the questions that we are asking in our research. So such method could be, let's say, a combination of focus groups, and focus groups, that method represents qualitative research, and we can do surveys as well, and surveys represent quantitative method of research. So we can combine different methods to answer research questions. So that is why some believe that there is not one best position, but we could actually combine different methods to observe and to collect data about human behavior. Other research decisions to make that are important, first of all, when you're going to conduct research this semester, and one of the things that you want to consider is, what is your field of study? Is it going to be wide or narrow? So if you want to do something wide, for instance, one of the things that crosses my mind is now, how do people in the United States use social media? That question is very, very wide. We're asking about the general population, but you can also ask something specific, such as how do millennials use social media to communicate with their coworkers? So you can be more specific in that area. Another thing is whether a researcher should be dispassionate or involved. So if you want to, for example, join, I mentioned that example, like observing a ritual of a tribe in New Zealand, but it can be also something else. Let's say you want to see how for instance, you want to go and look at the audience, that is just, and you go to a stand-up comedy and you want to observe you want to observe behavior of an audience. So what are you going to do? Are you going to go and try to get into this role of an audience member and just engage in that stand-up comedy from that perspective, or are you just going to be somewhere in the corner observing, as a person who doesn't really care about stand-up comedy, is just like intrigued by that phenomenon, why people really like coming to see the different stand-ups? So are you just going to be in the corner and try to observe everyone without like knowing much about, and not knowing much, but without like being really that interested in the stand-up, just trying to be disengaged and not be one of the participants, one of the audience members, just observe everyone from that role of a dispassionate researcher? Should your research be objective and subjective? It's usually when we engage with, let's say, this qualitative research, such as focus groups or interviews, ethnography. When we do such form of research, when we use such methods in research, we usually rely on people's perspectives, individual perspectives on an issue, and those perspectives are subjective. We're focusing on them. We're looking at diverse perspectives, and we're collecting this data that could be, in a way, subjective. When it comes to objective research, it is more straight to the point. We're collecting data. We are focusing on math, and that's statistics. One of the things that students do not really like about communication research, but once they learn that it's actually, that statistic is not so complex, they are more likely to engage in it. So your objective research, you can simply do a study where you're going to ask people about their voting preferences in the next elections, for instance, and you ask them a lot of questions, and based on their answers, you can kind of make predictions of how people are going to vote. And another thing that you want to ask yourself is, are you going to focus on your questions or participants' answers? Are you going to be strict on your questions, or are you going to look into participant answers and based on that design research? When it comes to one or the other viewpoint, is usually your questions. That's usually always in line with quantitative research, where we have a straightforward study with that's quantitative research numbers. When it comes to qualitative research, that can be more subjective focus, that can focus on individual perspectives. In that case, we usually allow ourselves to look at participant answers and draw conclusions based on that. Well, other things that you can ask is, should your sample be large or small? Like when it comes to presidential elections, and when we want to draw conclusions about how Americans are going to vote in next elections, of course, our sample needs to be large. But when we talk about our community at PACE, and if you want to, let's say, survey students to ask them about survey students just on the Plaza campus and ask them about their attitudes towards vaccines against COVID. You can use a small sample because it is a small community. Another thing that you should ask is, should your data be qualitative or quantitative? Some quantitative method of research, as I mentioned, includes surveys or experiments or content analysis. When it comes to qualitative research, we focus on focus groups, interviews, ethnography, observations, etc. And finally, reporting objective or subjective. So this really depends on the method that you're using. When it comes to quantitative research, we usually illustrate data using statistics. We use numbers to illustrate data. When it comes to qualitative research, we make more subjective viewpoints in our data analysis results. And also, what we basically there are three. Why did I mention all of this? Objectivity, subjectivity. I'm just wanted to point at different approaches to research. But if we group these approaches, we can identify three. One of them is empirical approach. So it is in line with the quantitative methods of research, and empirical means observing, measuring things from researchers' perspective. When it comes to the interpretive approach, it is, what do you think, objective or subjective? It is subjective. It is more subjective because our goal is to observe and interpret things from participants' perspective. And finally, there's a critical approach. This is where we ask whose interests are advanced by communication. And let me show you some examples of these three approaches. When it comes to the critical approach, that could be, if you look at these three, it could be probably a bit more complex. How do you ask questions in advertising using these three approaches? So basically, these three approaches are very important because depending on them, you are going to create, depending on how you see the world, you're going to create questions. So do you think that things could be measurable? Do you think the data could be generalized? So what is your perspective? And if you look at it, you will pose questions based on your perspective of the world. So when it comes to this critical approach, the question that you could ask about that is related to advertising is, how does the ad promote the advertiser's interests? And what you're going to do, you're going to analyze appeals in the ad to understand how it promotes the interests of the advertiser and consumerism. Interpretive, on the other hand, will ask a question: how do people react to the ads? It's a very broad question. And to answer these questions, they could collect data by utilizing interviews. So they could interview people and to understand their reactions to this ad, or they can do focus groups. They can simply play the ad and then observe people's reaction in that focus group, collect their comments, and so on. When it comes to objective empiricism, when it comes to objective approach, empiricism, the question that they would be interested in is, did the ad work? So they want to measure how, what were the effects of this ad on consumers. So they're going to, after publishing the ad, after promoting the ad, they're going to survey consumers, and they're gonna ask them questions about the ad to measure their knowledge, or they're gonna assess their behavior and opinions. They're gonna see whether they actually bought the product after seeing the ad. So these are differences among these three approaches. So now that you have some understanding of basic principles and basic approaches to research, I want you to start thinking about your own research study. So what you're going to do, you will need to, aside from watching this lecture, I would strongly encourage you to, you should also read chapter number 1 in the textbook. And then I also want you to complete an exercise. What you need to do for this exercise, think about an issue you would like to study. Examples at the beginning of this presentation should help you think of a potential topic. So what is it that you want to study? What is it that you are interested in? Explain why this issue is important to study and which category do you feel it falls into? Is it interpretive, empirical, or critical? I also want you to reflect on what you have learned from the textbook chapter 1 and this presentation. Address any confusion or concerns you might have. So whatever you feel in this lecture was not maybe not clear, or you want me to clarify it further or provide more examples, just let me know. And simply, look at the chapter 1, look at my presentation and see what are some of the things that you would what are some of the things that you found intriguing or that you feel should be further clarified or that you're looking forward to learning more about. So I would really like you to share that with me and post your answer under how to start a research project in classes. I want you to write between 200 and 250 words and post it by Friday, January 28th at midnight. Okay, so that is all that I had for you for today. This is the reference list. And if you have any questions, you can email me at mbantic@pace.edu. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to delivering another lecture to you. Bye-bye.